aggregate demand then. So lots of specification objectives here, but it's not as hard as it looks. So let's just jump in. We're not going to cover absolutely all of these actually. We're just going to look at the first top few. Alright then, so aggregate demand is looking at the total demand in an economy for goods and services at a certain price level at a period in time. Aggregate, just remember, is kind of the sum of the collected total. And what's more useful to learn, although I've learned both of them, is the equation. So the components of aggregate demand, AD equals C plus I plus G, this is domestic demand, plus X minus M. Okay, and C stands for consumer expenditure or consumer spending, investment, government spending, exports, we've got export, and imports is M, because obviously I's already been taken by investment there, so we needed another letter. Okay, and aggregate demand slopes downwards. You do, in the specification it says recognise, I think if we go back to recognise that aggregate demand and the price level are related. In the textbook there's a short section about why aggregate demand slopes downwards. They actually changed the specification after they brought out the textbook to just so you recognise that AD slopes downwards. But there are some reasons why it slopes downwards, so if you want to learn about those, have a look at the textbook or just look them up online. Okay, so first of all, what affects consumer expenditure or consumer spending? There's lots of sections in the textbook, pages 82 to 85, about what affects it, but what I've done is just pick out kind of 4 main factors, so it's easier for you to remember for the exam. So real disposable income, so this is your income after income tax has been deducted and benefits have been added back in, or added in the first place. So if you, to increase consumer expenditure, your income would have to go up so that you can afford more. And to decrease consumer expenditure, your income would have to go down so you afford less. So this would be affected by, the level of income tax the government are charging and, benefits. We've had a lot of cuts in benefits lately. So have a think about what impact that has on consumer expenditure. Consumer confidence. High confidence would lead to an increase in C, low confidence decrease in C, because why would high confidence lead to an increase in C? Well, people know they're going to be employed, they feel like they're going to be employed, they feel like they don't necessarily have to have lots of savings because they're not going to be made unemployed. Whereas if you're worried about being made unemployed, you're not going to book a holiday, you're not going to buy a new car, you're not going to move house, you're just really worried about whether you're going to be able to afford your day-to-day things. Interest rates, remember, are the reward for saving and the cost of borrowing. So if the interest rate is low, it's really cheap to borrow money and there's not very much incentive to save because you're not getting much reward back. So that would increase consumer expenditure. If the interest rate is high, there's a high incentive to save and it's expensive to borrow. So it would decrease consumer expenditure. And your population growing, more people, more consumer expenditure, fewer people, less consumer expenditure. Okay, so nice question here from a past paper, and it's looking at Ireland. I'm just going to get my highlighter out. This is what you should do in the exam, and look at just highlighting some factors. So we need 3 reasons why consumer expenditure might have fallen in Ireland in 2009. Okay, so some multinational companies, including Dell, world's 2nd largest personal computer maker, pulled out of the country. Could this affect confidence? Not only, I can't imagine that, they employ every person in Ireland, but they might be a very big employer. And even if you've not been made redundant by them, you might be worried if you work for a similar company or in the private sector. They also experienced a property slump, so you're not feeling as rich anymore because the value of your house has decreased. A rise in household debt as well, so that reduces your disposable income, I suppose, that you can spend because you owe a lot of debt. Unemployment rose, okay, so lots of people losing their jobs. So lots and lots of factors here. that you could use for reasons why consumer expenditure could have fallen as well. Okay, next section then, 85 to 87, is on savings. Now this is not part, I'm going to highlight this is not part of AD, but as you can see, there was a question on it one year, so make sure you do have some understanding of savings. It's just, I suppose it's the reverse of consumer expenditure though, isn't it? Savings do come into the circular flow income, it's a leakage. So real disposable income. So if you have a large real disposable income, you are probably able to save money. If you have a low disposable income, you're not able to save very much money because you're using all your money on your basic needs. Now, just because, say, your income increases, just because your saving may increase, it doesn't mean that consumer expenditure decreases. They don't necessarily always move in opposite directions. You know, if you earn more, you might save more and you might spend more. In relative terms. Higher interest rates, better reward for saving, so you increase your savings. Lower interest rate, lower reward for saving, decreased savings. Confidence, if you have low confidence, you know, those poor Irish people back there losing jobs and high rate of unemployment, you might increase your saving just for a rainy day because you think there's going to be a rainy day. And the availability of banks as well, financial institutions, so other places where you can actually save your money safely. Does it, you know, where you can actually gain interest on your savings and you're not worried that you're going to lose your savings. So this was South Africa, a case study was based on 1 year. 2 reasons why the level of saving is low in South Africa. So 4.5 million people unemployed. Is that a big number? I don't know because it's not in percentages, but yes, it is a big number. 25% of people unemployed. Oh, how awful. That's really, really poor, bad for them. Okay. Lots of people very poor. 49 million people live on less than $2 a day. Could you imagine that? Just really, really, if you think about it, in this day and age, you know, when we have so much in the UK, living on less than $2 a day, it's disgusting, isn't it, that this happens in, you know, 2015. Okay. Low levels of savings and investment, low rates of interest as well, so not getting very much reward back from saving. Stronger, so this suggests that not many people actually have bank accounts either. So lots and lots of reasons there that you can look at, reasons why the level of saving is low. People don't have very much money, so they don't have very much to save. People are living off really low incomes. Again, those are quite similar. Low rates of interest, so low reward for saving. And the countries, people not having bank accounts and there being a lack of good financial institutions doesn't encourage saving. Okay, next section then, investment, 87 to 88. So investment, just make sure you're clear on what the definition of investment is as well. So it's spending by businesses on capital equipment. So changes in consumer expenditure, if there's more demand for products in your economy, if consumer expenditure increases, you might find that investment increases because you want to expand your current output to meet that demand. If you're very confident about the future, you're going to encourage investment. If there's low interest rates, so it's cheap to borrow, that increases investment. And if corporation tax, which is the tax on profits, if there's low corporation tax, so it means that you keep more of your profits, there might be an incentive to invest, especially foreign, you might get FDI, foreign direct investment, if you've got low corporation tax rates. Because there's a real incentive because you retain a lot of your profit. So here we go, some questions from a few years ago, so not linked to the case study, but you can just use those points there. But the danger area is out of 6 marks, so just be careful. It's not just stating and then elaborating a little bit, it's really explaining why that would lead to an increase in investment, not just it would affect investment, it's an increase in investment. Okay, so government spending now, pages 88. There's lots of reasons here, but I've just picked out some of the main ones. So economic activity, the stage of the business cycle or the economic cycle. You're going to learn about this in the A2 unit, the global economy. But in a recession, because there's lots of people usually unemployed, usually you get high government spending on benefits and the such, and usually, not always, you get the government trying to stimulate the economy. Whereas in a boom, you might get fewer benefit payments. These things here are automatic stabilisers, but you might get what we call discretionary fiscal policy as well. So the government actually trying to stimulate the economy in a recession and calm it down in a boom. Desire, is there any desire to reduce government debt? So we've got huge government debt, but if there's no desire to reduce your debt, you probably keep on spending or your deficit. But if you want to reduce your deficits, you probably need to cut your spending as well. And then we're looking at trade, so 89 to 99. So this stuff is very, very similar to what causes a current account deficit or surplus. So when we're looking at net exports is exports minus imports, or the value actually of exports minus imports. So an increase in net exports would be when you're getting trade surplus, and decreased net exports be trade deficit, or moving from a deficit to a smaller deficit, or a surplus to a smaller surplus in that case. So real income abroad, so if incomes abroad are going up, you've got increased demand for exports abroad. Real income at home, if your income's falling at home, bad for your country going into a recession, or you're in a recession, but actually probably quite good for your current account because your demands for imports would fall. Exchange rate depreciation should increase net exports. Interest rate decrease causes depreciation, so again should increase net exports by increasing the demand for exports, because the price appears to be relatively cheaper and then than before, that is, and the demand for imports should fall because they become relatively more expensive. Competitiveness, if you just get better at making your products more productive, more cost competitive, better quality. And government restrictions on trade. I put a question mark because when you tend to get restrictions on trade, other countries retaliate. It's not as clear cut as just lots of restrictions decrease net exports. But it could influence how many imports you have. But it's not just like, oh right, we're gonna say you can't import anything, and then that should increase our net exports. Because what do you think another country's going to do to you if you say, oh no, we're not having products from that country? They're going to be like, all right, we're not having products from you, it's fine. So it's not as clear cut as that strategy. So anyway, using an aggregate demand and aggregate supply diagram, analyse the effects of a fall in exports on the economy. We'll come back to that question because I think I've got it later on. So you can just tell there that there hasn't been a question on what determines government spending or what determines the value of net exports. So look out for those types of areas. Back to the circular flow of income then, with your leakages and your injections. I'm just showing you how AD actually matches up with these things, because we learnt before that by before I mean the previous presentation, economic growth, if your injections are larger than your leakages, you actually get an increase in real GDP. Real GDP should increase, and it's because AD should be increasing. And so it's linked to it. So consumer income, consumer expenditure and consumer spending is, your kind of the expenditure part of your economy, and it's determined, your disposable income we've got income, but you minus out savings, taxation and imports to have what you're actually spending, and then investment appears there, government spending's down there, exports are there, imports are there as well. So it all kind of matches up, and you can see, you know, if AD increases, you get an increase in aggregate demand. If injections are larger than leakages, you get an increase in real GDP caused by an increase in aggregate demand. So they're all of these concepts, they're all related to each other. So here we're just going to go through a few scenarios. See the time. So if you have an increase in real disposable income, what happens? Real disposable income, obviously C would increase. We'd imagine, but I might increase as well, because businesses might expand their production if they don't have any spare capacity, that is. But also we might find that here we've got imports increasing as well, because you're buying more of all types of goods, so you might be buying imports as well. So AD should, logically, AD should increase, but only if this part is larger than that part, okay? If they equal each other, AD is going to stay the same, and AD might increase if you're spending more money on imports. Okay, so what happens if there's an increase in real disposable income? Let's see if I can get a pen out and draw some of these things. We've already done that, actually, haven't we? We said that that would increase, this would increase, and also this would increase. So we hope that this increases, but obviously there's a minus figure there. An increase in interest rates. Well, the incentive to save would be increased, so we find that we might not spend as much and might not invest as much because it's expensive to invest. And if the interest rate increases, that causes appreciation in the exchange rate, so exports appear more expensive, so we probably have this decreasing, and imports appear more cheaply, so we probably have this increasing as well in value. So overall, what's going to happen? AD is going to decrease, isn't it, on that example. Exchange rate depreciation, well, that makes exports appear more to be cheaper and imports to be more expensive, so demand for those would decrease, demand for exports would increase, so we should have AD increasing. Was that question before? Oh no, that was the fall in exports and economy, so obviously AD, I just draw AD, C plus I plus G, G plus X minus M. Okay, so if this decreases, we're going to find, here's my very quick diagram, we're going to find AD also moves in, but it's dependent on what's happening to all these other things as well. What's happening to this? We might find that this is decreasing by more than that's decreased, so you actually should have an increase in AD. But let's go on. Okay, confidence is low in the economy. Probably don't get very much spending when confidence is low in the economy. Don't get very much investment. So AD would fall or be lower than it would be if confidence was high. The government decreased income and corporation tax. Yay, I'd like that. So you should have more real disposable income to spend, so consumer expenditure should increase, investment should increase, maybe as well, like you'd have like cheaper costs or prices, so maybe exports would decrease, increase, not decrease, and I don't know, as long as the government don't cut their spending to fund those types of things, AD should increase. But you can see there's lots of depends upon, aren't there? So they're great comment on questions, those factors. So the multiplier effect, important definition here, the process by which any change in a component of aggregate demand results in a greater final change in real GDP. So this is what it looks like on a diagram. So for example, if I go back to our equation here, if government spending, let's just rub out some of these things. If government spending increased, okay, the government said they're going to build a new school. Okay, so this increases. Now, by building a new school, they have to employ builders, they have to employ new staff. All of those people will be employed, and that money goes to them in the form of their wages and their salaries. And you might find that that causes C to also increase as well. You might find that there's a bit more investment in the local area around the school, more shops opening up because they think, oh yeah, this would be a good business to locate around where there's a school. So you might find that from the initial increase in government spending, or any of the factors it could be, it actually causes an increase in other things. And that's why you get a diagram that looks like this one here. So you get this initial increase, the rise after the injection, but the multiplier effect, which keeps it kind of feeding through the economy, actually causes a larger increase in real GDP. But it does work the other way as well. So if you cut that government spending, you might find that real GDP falls by a greater level than the amount that you cut it by. So if you cut it by 2 billion, you might find that real GDP actually falls by 7 billion. So it can be good and it can work against you as well. So what happens when we have an increase in AD? Well, we can see from the diagram, real GDP should increase as long as there's spare capacity in the economy. Unemployment should decrease because we need more workers to produce that additional output. And the price level we can see here has increased, and that means we've got some inflation. Opposite happens if there's a decrease in AD, so real GDP has decreased, unemployment has increased, and the price level has decreased. So deflation, or more likely to be a bit disinflation in the economy. But it depends upon three things. So the effect of the change in AD will depend upon the size of the change, so obviously bigger shift, bigger change and effect on real GDP, price level and unemployment. The size of the multiplier, so the bigger the multiplier, the bigger the final impact on real GDP, price level and unemployment. And original level of the economy. So here, if we're starting off at this point, which is where the economy has a lot of spare capacity, we get real GDP increasing, we get unemployment decreasing, but we don't get any inflation because there's lots of spare capacity. Here, we get all kind of effects on all three of the kind of indicators. And here, this is meant to be a vertical point. I know it's not very vertical there, but here we get no increase in real GDP. We get no change in unemployment because we've not increased real GDP, and we get high pressure on the price level, and so we get high inflation. So that's all of aggregate demand.